the Vietnam War, a turning point in the American narrative. National unity and the heroic luster around World War II seemed tarnished when American troops started landing in Vietnam. But for Native Americans who served, it's even more complicated. A lot of the language used to drum up government support for the war evoked the American frontier. In fact, at the height of the war, during a Senate hearing, General Maxwell D. Taylor, then chairman of the Intelligence Board, intentionally referred to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army as Indians.
We found that in our frontier days, we couldn't plant the corn outside the stockade if the Indians were still around. We planted a lot of corn with the Indians still around, and we sometimes lost the corn.
Despite historic trauma and broken treaties that the United States inflicted on Native people, about 42,000 soldiers, identifying as American Indians, served. Over 90% of them volunteered. On this special episode of Mutually Inclusive, we bring you the stories of 2 Michigan natives who volunteered to serve in Vietnam.
I was going to college at Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, and it was like December, and I got my draft notice. All my aunts, uncles, grandpas had all served in the military, and I went and talked with my one uncle who had been a career person in the Army, and he said, "Man, join." I went and looked at the various branches, and of course, my uncle was in the Army, so I wanted to kind of follow in his shoes.
Of the more than 2 million active combat troops in Vietnam, over half served in the Army.
They sent me a letter saying I was accepted into the U.S. Army, drafted into the U.S. Army. Then they come right to the house and informed me. Just in case that I would take off, because in those days a lot of them were evading the draft, and that they figured I was going to be one of them. No, I wouldn't. I went in there anyway. November 12th, actually. You didn't forget that date. 1965, I went into the service then. And they in there, they tested us, and then that's when I got into the Army. Your abilities. That's what they were looking for.
Each man's personal history will be recorded, his hobbies classified, his educational level determined. He will be reduced to a number, then elevated to a name.
Five 692-118 is your identification number. You are single, no prior service.
You know, they gave me orders to go to basic training in Texas.
Basic training I took in Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was there 8 weeks. Then they transferred me to Fort Lee, Virginia.
The 8-week transition from civilian to soldier was more than team building and weapons. It influenced the military occupation specialties, or the on-the-job training each soldier received.
And then I was in something called Personnel Awaiting Technical School. And that was a kind of a period where you had finished your basic training, but that they weren't ready for you yet to go into the technical schools because of another class or something. So you got to do wonderful things like guard duty.
From Fort Lee, Virginia, they were organizing companies to go into Vietnam at that time. one of the first ones coming out to go there.
After 8 weeks of boot camp, there were another 8 weeks of training specifically on Vietnam, called RVN, and then MOS for enlisted troops and OJT for draftees. Between induction and deployment, a soldier could train for more than 9 months before they saw combat.
10,000 feet. Gotta fly.
Flew all the way across the United States to California. Then from California we went to Hawaii. Then from Hawaii we done island hopping all the way across till we landed in the Philippines, and then they got us into different units, and then we flew into Nam. Then got us onto deuce and a half trucks. They trucked us into the country, in country.
And then I got the uncle saying, once you're going to Vietnam. So that was like 68, right before the Tet Offense. I got there right during the Tet Offense, which was, was kind of crazy because things were just like completely disoriented there,
The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong launched an offensive against the South Vietnamese, U.S., and Allied troops on the lunar holiday called Tet. It lasted months and involved hundreds of thousands from every side. Ultimately, it failed to achieve military victory, but in its wake, it left the deadliest year in the entire war. In 1968, over 16,000 U.S. and Allied troops lost their life. Civilian casualties were more than 24,000, and the North lost over 100,000 soldiers. During the first of its 3 phases, troops had to scramble over 4,000 sorties.
I started flying what are called sorties. Sorties are when you organize yourself to go into a particular area, and then you have an action plan for getting out. And so when we'd fly in on those sorties, and I flew in on a lot of them, even though my job was to keep the supplies and things going, but when you had to go out and get a piece of equipment off a wrecked helicopter, it wasn't like in the best part. It'd been shot down by the enemy, so it wasn't exactly the best part of Vietnam to be in, because that's where the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong were,
The U.S. flew over 5 million sorties in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The U.S. Air Force lost 2,251 aircraft. Total lives lost? Unknown.
When they found out I was pretty good at nighttime, they couldn't sneak up in there. I would actually go out and hunt them. And they wouldn't hear nothing than all the ones I had peers. It scared the hell out of them. So they kept me in there doing that, on guard duty. Because of the Viet Cong, we're pretty good at that too. But they proved that I was better, because I could hear them. In that type of thing like that, when you're in there's a complete darkness, black, you can't see nothing. You can't see the hand in front of your eyes. That's when your senses for the ear and the nose. You could get the scent and hear. You could hear insects crawling underneath the leaves and stuff along on the ground. That's how quiet it was. Any little sound or even a scent different from what in the jungle, you could pick up on that. Say like them, they had a certain scent to them of most of the time they would smoke. Their type of tobacco would really get to put out a scent, or even their body odor would put out a scent. Once you got to recognize that, you were okay.
I had a lot of inclination and everything for the woods, because of my dad and my grandpa, my great-grandpa. But it still was nothing like it. There's that smell, the smell of the jungle, that wet, musty smell.
I was a lot smaller then. I was just about like them. My skin tone was about like them, the same as theirs. My hair was just like them. They couldn't hardly tell sometimes the difference between me and one of them. We dressed like them at night, to look like them. That's how we got close to them. We learned the Vietnamese language. So when we seen one, a bunch of them, or a few of them, we could talk. But then there was a little bit difference in the dialect. That's what they would recognize. We'd get shot. So you had to be very careful on that. The people were nice. When we went to villages and that, they would welcome us in there because they knew we were around and the Viet Cong wouldn't come into their village to kill them or take their young people out to train them to fight against the Americans, as they called them then. But they fed us, which was nice. Rice, just like rice soup. The one guy there, he liked their rice soup. He said that meat was in there real nice. Looked at each other, started laughing. What are you guys laughing at? He said, what do you think kind of meat that was? I don't know, it almost looked like beef they were eating at it. They said, okay, now listen here. You hear them out there? Your monkeys was. That's what he was eating. Made him sick. He threw it up. No, he wouldn't eat with them anymore when especially the rice, because the meat in the rice was monkey.
We weren't supposed to be in Cambodia when I was there, or Laos, or any of those places. We were supposed to be in Vietnam. Of course, we had counterintelligence activity going on in all those places. They were using those countries just like they have in the Middle East to go through or transport things or whatever. I mean, because we weren't at war with them, we were at war with the Viet Cong. But the Viet Cong were there, and a lot of the leaders were there. The same way we use drones and stuff to send them in there. Well, that same situation was. But what we used to do is we'd go in and capture them. We'd go in with an elite force like the Green Berets or an elite force in the Army or Marine Corps or SEALs or whoever we'd go in with, And we'd go capture a general or whatever and bring them back out and fly them out of a helicopter and take them back for debriefing,
Many of these missions into Laos and Cambodia were part of an effort to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a complex system of North Vietnamese supply routes with 1,800 miles of vehicle-ready roads where 195 tons of supplies traveled south each day. The intense bombing and fighting with which the U.S. responded was not even partially acknowledged until 2012. Full acknowledgement of the widespread destruction the U.S. caused in Laos and Cambodia did not come until 2015.
Having a U.S. president in Laos would have once been unimaginable. 6 decades ago, this country fell into civil war. And as the fighting raged next door in Vietnam, your neighbors and foreign powers, including the United States, intervened here. As a result of that conflict and its aftermath, many people fled or were driven from their homes. At the time, the U.S. government did not acknowledge America's role. It was a secret war. And for years, the American people did not know. Even now, many Americans are not fully aware of this chapter in our history, and it's important that we remember today. Over 9 years, from 1964 to 1973, the United States dropped more than 2 million tons of bombs here in Laos, more than we dropped on Germany and Japan combined during all of World War II.
But the worst and the scariest was when we used to go on those sorties into Cambodia. We weren't supposed to be in Cambodia. And they'd tell us, they'd say, you get shot down or something, man, we don't know you. We're not sending nobody after you. We don't know you. We're not supposed to be here. So we can't say, that you were shot down in Cambodia. You just end up being a MIA. That's what you end up being. So that was really scary, knowing that you jumped in a helicopter and you would go flying into a country you're not even supposed to be in there, and if something happened, nobody was coming to get you. and nobody knew that you were there, haha, you know. That was so scary. We had punji sticks, you know, they used to play. I don't know if you know what punji sticks are, but they'd have punji sticks, and you come and find one of your guys, you know, on punji sticks. Or one just had a punji stuck right up through their boots. That's why they went with the metal bottoms on the boots, was because of punji sticks. And sometimes they'd lace them with poison, or sometimes they'd lace them with body excrement, and just so the infection would start more quickly.
Then I got into a unit where they would take us, and some of us, and search and destroy. We'd go out there and look for the people. We wouldn't care. We'd kill anybody. Sometimes we'd find out what's left of them. Either that, we were lucky enough to get them alive yet. Yeah, they wanted guys that didn't give a damn. They wouldn't back down from nothing. I was one of them. Didn't back down from nobody. That's what I was taught.
Those people had cities underneath the ground. So we would bomb the crap out of them, and they'd have hospitals underneath the ground. They had pantries and hospitals and just about anything you would have above ground, they had underground, armories. It was amazing.
Where they could fit into their, which as you call them, tunnels then. The tunnels were something else too. They were maybe a good 500 yards long, and branch out underneath there, then pop up anywhere around in that certain area, a good 500 yards around circumference, like in that area, and get you before you got them. Their tunnels were unique. Say, like you'd see one over there, and then the next thing you know, you'd be over that area searching for them, then it'd be right behind you.
I want the Vietnam War to end. We want to get America out of all of Asia, all of Latin America, all of Africa.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest. For the most part orderly, minor scuffles did occur between the demonstrators and hecklers. A 3-hour parade takes the demonstrators across the Potomac on their way to the Pentagon. The crowd, estimated at about 50,000 persons, was a loose confederation of some 150 groups and included adults, students, even children.
When I first came back, it was terrible. You know, I tried to understand it, but a bunch of us put our lives on the line for this country. You know, and I saw that premise in my mind still today about the respect for veterans. But we had that whole transition taking place at that time in the United States, you know, 68, 67, 68, 69, where, you know, they wanted us to get out of Vietnam.
So they brought us all in from that. Then right away, we got amongst the population in the airport. They despised us. They spit at us. They threw food at us. They called us all kinds of names, baby killers. We shouldn't have even come back there. Yeah, and then when they were throwing food at us, we went to the restaurant. That's when they started harassing us. Well, the rest of the 3,000 started getting into the airport. We took over the airport then. We were fighting with the people in there. They had the police there, they had the MPs. Most of the guys got arrested.
And so when we came back, you couldn't wear your uniform. You know, I remember all those pictures of my dad when he came back from World War II and he had his uniform on and everybody was waving the American flags and, you know, kissing him and hugging him. And we come back and people spit on me in the airport, you know. Called me baby burner, you know, because I used to use those flamethrowers and stuff. And after doing all that and then going through that physiological and psychological situation there, and then to come back and, you know, people telling you to get off the street and, you know, just calling you terrible names, every name you could possibly believe.
An American Indian friend of mine who lives on the Indian nation of Alcatraz put it to me very succinctly. He told me how as a boy on an Indian reservation he had watched television and he used to cheer the cowboys when they came in and shot the Indians. And then suddenly one day he stopped in Vietnam and he said, "My God, I'm doing to these people the very same thing that was done to my people." And he stopped.
Out of the 83 that I was originally with and in Nam with, there's about 16 of us left. 20 of those guys committed suicide because they was unwelcome home, not re-entered and back into the service. That's where they were more comfortable with. To this day, there's a lot of them that are still like that. Lifers into the service.
Then you got Indian people, it was even worse. And they had multi-generational trauma plus Vietnam, you know, so, I mean, you know, boarding schools and all that kind of stuff, and then, you know, their family had veterans from Vietnam, you know.
They welcomed me home. Yeah. Here, having parties and all. Yeah, the Native people always, they were never against the ones that went to the service. They welcomed back. They welcomed the troops back real well into their homes and everything. You know. Shared the food with them. They never were against them. You get more cooperation out of a lot of them nowadays. They treat you a little better, or they did me.
As a percentage of the population, they're the largest percentage of serving as volunteers, not draftees, of any other race. You know, and that's kind of amazing. But I think it goes back a little bit to that whole warrior ethic, you know, that's been, even though it's been used in a lot of movies or stuff, but I mean, I think it's that protectionist activity, and I think it's a fact that so many generations have, even when they weren't able to vote. We had Native people that were out there in World War I and World War II, and they didn't even have the right to vote yet. They thought everybody was going to be a scout, and they watched too many. They watched too many of the old Western movies, you know. But Native people are that way. And like cutting their hair, they did an experiment. You know, that's something that Native people are proud of. And they found that the people that had the longer hair had better instincts and stuff, or could connect better with the land or whatever. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're used to protecting their community.
Whether it's the warrior spirit or that call to protect one's land, Native Americans who served in Vietnam influenced a new generation, and today, Native Americans continue to be among the highest ethnic groups to enlist into service in the United States military. Across the country, no powwow begins until veterans have had their song.
This is ode to my hair. poem I wrote with Jim Northrop in the 2000, early 2000s, 2001. Dear Hare, you are long, but you are thin. You've seen many lengths in your life, the shortness of war and the longness of peace. Today, you had a wash and wax. Maybe not tomorrow. Powwow is tomorrow. You will be braided into 2 braids. Today, you are but 1 braid. Monday, back to the same old grind. Miigwech.
Support for Mutually Inclusive comes from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.